Hi everyone. In this video, we'll be creating a kind of backend clone of Reddit using microservices. So each functionality or each feature will be done in a separate microservice, as you can see in this diagram. So there will be a gateway, and there will be three microservices in our case, each of one which handles a case, and we'll be connecting to a single DB. You can connect to multiple DBs, but we'll be doing with single DB in this video. And so we'll be starting with three services basically. So there's this user service which takes care of authentication, and it checks if the user has access to some particular function or not. And the post service basically does what Reddit does. It creates, edits, updates post. And subreddit service is similar to post, but for subreddits, like it can create subreddit and it can add user to a subreddit, and whatever post you do on this subreddit, we can get those and so on. So like, there are pretty much many features. I'll be covering most of them. The function of this gateway is to handle API request coming from the client. So the client sends the request to this gateway. Basically this runs on some server. This is basically the Express app, you can say. So this is Express app, and this routes the request to that specific microservice which needs the action to be taken. And this gateway won't be directly interacting with the DB anytime. Only the microservice will be interacting with the DB. Okay, so I think the first step to get started is to see how the DB design is. So we have 5 tables in our case. So each table has particular fields. I think I'll just start. I have this pSQL running, so you can download it. I'll put the link below. You can just download it and you can get it running, and you can just say PostgreSQL, and you can just say pSQL Postgres. That should take you into a terminal kind of thing where you can run commands on. So in this what we want to do is we want to create a DB. So you can just say create database. I'll just increase the font. Yeah, create database. Let's say Reddit. Let's say backend Reddit. Okay, so now to use this database, you can just say \c and backend Reddit. Okay. Now we want to create tables. So first table will be the user table. Let's create, because we have to make sure that let's say here if we are creating with post, so we have this user author field, basically who created this post, which references these users, right? It's a foreign key. So we need the user table first. We can start from there. So we can start with the user table because it doesn't have any connection with any other table. It doesn't have any dependencies. So we could start by saying create table users, and user has a basically first let's go the primary key, which is this ID, and the user has a username which is varchar of 16, or let's say 8, and he or she has an email which is 32, and password which is 164. I'll tell you the reason why we're using 164 here. Yeah, we have created the users table, and think we can go with the posts table. So this too has a serial key, which is a primary key, and this post has a title which is varchar of 32, and it has a description as well, which is pretty much the post. Let's give it as 264, and we have the author field which is integer, and it references to users of ID. So what we're doing here is that if you are familiar with relational databases, what references does it? It's a foreign key, which means this author is a user. So yeah, this must be a user which is present in this table. So that's what references does. And I think there's this like likes, the number of likes, which is an integer, and default is set to 0. And yeah, we can create that. So we created the post table. The next one would be the subreddit table, I think. Yeah, so let's go with subreddit, and this also has an ID, which is a primary key, and the name, which is varchar of 32, and the description of that subreddit, which is varchar of let's say 64. Yeah, so the left we have the comment thing, and we have the let's go with subreddit users. Let's say create table subreddit users. So this is so the reason to use this table is that to see the list of users in a subreddit, I think this is kind of an efficient way to do, because we can just map the subreddit and the user ID simply. So we can say subreddit ID, which is an integer, and it references subreddits table, and user ID, which is also an integer, and it references the users table. So I think we'll know the reason for doing this way when we implement this. So I think we can get started. I think there's one table left, which is a common table. I'll just write that. Create table comments, and this will have an ID. So it's a primary key, and this also has a post ID, which is an integer, which references post of ID. And what does, yeah, we have a content, so which is basically the comment itself, and let's limit it to 128. So now that we have created all the tables, I think we can get started with implementing the first service, which is post, so which is a user service. So we want to implement basic authentication. So let me say, okay, let's exit out of this. So right now I have this Reddit folder. So what I want to do is I want to create a new directory, and I'm going to call this user service. Okay, and inside this, let's cd into that. So this is a separate let's say this is a separate service, right? This is not dependent on other services. So for each service we are going to be using gRPC and protocol buffs in order to be communicating with any other service, or even the gateway communicating with some microservices. So for that, I think I have a video on protobufs and gRPC. You can have a look at it, because I can't be explaining that in this video, and because it will be like too long to finish the entire thing, and also because I have a video already, so you can have a look into that. I'll just put the link in the description as well. And yeah, I think we can just install whatever we need for gRPC protobufs. I think we can say, let's say npm init, and I'm using a y flag to say yes to everything. To install gRPC and protobuf handlers, so we can just do gRPC JS and protoloader from gRPC itself. So we can just do this, and apart from this, we also need PG for PostgreSQL, we could say a client kind of thing, and also we need JSON web token to handle tokens and all, because we are going to be we're going to be doing authentication and stuff, so we need JWT. Also I think we need bcrypt JS in order to hash the password. So if you're familiar with it, I think it's pretty simple. So before even starting to write the service, we need to have the proto file or proto definitions. So basically the proto file, .proto file. So to do that, we can just create a folder protos, and we have the protos folder, and we can do proto / let's say users.proto. So now we need to write the definitions of what are all the methods we are creating, and what the request and response structures are going to look like. So if you're familiar with proto, I think this might make sense. So we can start by saying syntax is equals to proto3. So we'll be using proto3 for this. And so I want to first list out all the functions which we're going to have in this user service. So we can do that by saying service, let's say user service, and the list of methods in this. So we're going to have create user, which takes create user request as first argument, and it returns create user response. And we are going to have get user, which actually similar, get user request, and returns get user response. And we're going to have create token. So you also have to remember that we are not going to be, let's say, using this directly, or the client is not going to see any of this directly. So only the gateway is going to contact this. So we need only specific functions instead of the whole functionality itself. For example, if the user is logging in, this service doesn't need to do all the stuff where we validate the input and all. So we can just do specific functions and specific requirements that this service needs to do. So for example, we are doing create token and we are not doing login, because create token is basically login, because it creates a token with the given payload and it returns the payload to the client. So the main functionality is to create a token, right? So that's what this user service is doing. So similarly, we are going to take create token request, and it will return create token response. And we'll have this function called isAuthenticated. So basically we'll be using this function as a kind of middleware kind of thing. So where the user or you can use this function as a middleware in order to see if the user is actually a valid user or not. And we'll also attach this user to the request itself, so that if you do request.user.id, you'll get the ID of the current user in all the routers in the gateway. I think it will make sense when we do that. So we can say isAuthenticated request, and it returns isAuthenticated response. So this is the 4 functions. These are the 4 functions we need. I think we can just start defining the structures or the request responses. The first one is create user request. Before that, I want to let's say we want to have a user. We want to define who a user is, right? Each user will have a username. Each user will have an email. He will also have a password and an int32, which is ID. The user will have an ID. So this is how a user is going to look. So basically we'll be using this user in our request and responses. So instead of writing this 4 fields again and again to describe a user, we'll just put it into a user message, and we'll use that message whenever we need to reference a user. So in this create user request, what we will be getting is of type user, let's say user or 1. So we'll be getting the user itself. So our job is to put this in DB, and after putting it in DB, we'll just return a response, which is basically, let's say, an int32 ID. It's an user ID which it returns. Get user request. So in this we don't have the user information, but what we'll be getting is the ID of the user, right? And the get user response will be of type user 1. So this is because also in this we won't be returning the password, but yeah, we can write this actually. We can do this way. So the third one is the create token request. So to create a token, we need the user again. Let's say the user, because we don't even need the password. We just need the username, email, and ID, let's say, and the response create token response will be a string token of which is 1. So we'll just return the token from this response. So the final one is authenticated. So it's actually authenticated request. To check if the user is authenticated or not, we only need the token. So we can just take the token as in the request and in the response what we'll be returning is whatever we need for the user to be identified. So we need I think the user itself, let's say the user as one, and also we need to say OK is equals to 2. So we need to see if this user is actually user or not. So to denote that, we say OK as false or true. So if it's false, if OK is false, then the user is not a valid user. So I think this is enough, right? So we have all the 4 functions and we have defined all the structures. So we can go on and create the index.js, right? Yeah, we can create the index.js. So to get started, we are not going to be using Express in this. So we are going to be using gRPC directly. So we are going to be creating a new file called gRPC.js. So this gRPC.js and whatever we are doing, this template is going to be similar for all the remaining services also. So we'll be doing for post, we'll be doing post.proto, and we'll be creating a gRPC.js. And I'll tell why we are creating this, and we'll be creating index.js as well. So the reason we are creating gRPC is it's like it creates a server and the server will listen at a port. So that's what this file is going to do. So for this we need to let's say we need the proto path. Basically we need the proto path where the user profile is in. So we can just say by directory name plus /proto /user.proto. So this is where my the user.proto is. We can just get the gRPC by saying require gRPC.js, and we can define a server by saying new gRPC.server. So we are going to be exporting a couple of functions from here. The first one is start gRPC server, and the second one is get gRPC server. So the reason to do this is any file, or in this case it's going to be index.js, will start the server and then get the server in order to, I will say why we are getting the server, but basically it starts the server and gets the server to further use the server or server, you could say, functionalities. So to start the gRPC server, we can say server.bind async address. So this we are going to be listening the user service at port 50050, and so gRPC dot, this is server credentials dot create insecure, and the third one is a callback, and we get the error and a port. So if there is some error, for now let's console.log error. Even better, we can just do console.log error. So else we can just say server is a server running at 127.0.0.1 the port. And after doing this, we can just do server.start. I think this comes under else. So if there's no error, then we can just start and then say it's running. So this is what we need to start the gRPC server. And to get the gRPC server, we are just going to return the server. So now that we have this gRPC file and we have this two functions exporting, so we can say start gRPC server and get gRPC server from gRPC file. We are going to use the proto loader. So this is a kind of boilerplate only. So we're going to say require at gRPC/proto loader. Say gRPC. We're going to import gRPC as well. and the proto path, which is directory name plus /proto/protos/user.proto. So there is something called package definition. So let me say this package definition. So we can say proto loader dot load sync and the file to which we want to load and some options, which is an object. So the option is keep case, and these are all basic boilerplate. You can say longs to be true, and you can actually experiment this with whatever cases you want. So I'm just setting, I think we don't need enums, defaults to true, on-offs to true. I think this must be string. So now we get the user proto gRPC dot load the package definition. It's load package definition of package definition. Now I want to start the gRPC server, and so after starting I want the server itself. So we'll say server is equals to get gRPC server, right? So I can now use this server to actually define what services or what functions we are going to be enforcing. So we can say server dot add service, and the service is user proto dot the service dot service. And what are the services we are going to be doing? So basically we have to, we have the create user function. For example, in our proto file we have this create user RPC or function. So we need to map that to some implementation in our case. So we need to have, let's say, function create user like this. So we need to put that create user here. So to do that, I'm not going to be creating functions here. I'll be creating in a separate file. So I'll be creating user.js, and I will be importing that here and then be using it. So okay, so I'll be keeping this open for some time. So let's say to do add functions here. So let's do node index.js, and it's running it the given port and address, right? So we just need to implement the functions. So let's open user.js, and first thing I'll be going to do is I'll be importing client from PG. So I'll just finish the database stuff. So we need to say client is new client config, which we'll be defining, and we can say client dot connect. So the client config is just the user, which is my name, and the database which you're going to use, let's say, which is backend Reddit, I guess. So let's import other things. So let's import JWT, which is JSON Web Token. Let's import bcrypt, which requires bcrypt.js. So I think that should be it. We can just try if we can just add it whenever we need anything else. Okay, so what we need to do is, with this file needs to export all the functions, or the 4 functions not defined, declared here. So declaration is here and the definition is in this file. So we can start with the first one, which is, let's say, create user. So should we, yeah, let's start with create user. So we can say exports dot create user is a function create user, and we have call and we have callback for this function. So call is what contains this proto request. So for example, call dot user in this case will have the user definition, everything in this message. So that's how we want to use it. So now we can just say, as I said, we can just grab everything like username, email, what else, password from call dot request dot user, because we have this user defined, which inside which we have the username. So first thing we want to do is hash the password, and then what we want to do is we want to store the fields, right? So so we can say bcrypt dot gen salt, the number of rounds to 10, and then we have the error and salt. We can use the salt to further hash the password. We have to handle the error. If there is some error, I want to return callback of error and null. So this is a callback which has two functions. One is the first argument is an error. So if there is some error, the data will be null. So basically the first argument is the error argument and the second one is the data. So if error is null, data will be not null, and if error is not null, then the data should be null. So now we can hash the password and give the salt, and what we get is error and hash. So if there's an error, copy this. If there's an error, then you can just return. What I want to do is I have the password as in the form of hash. Now I can use this client to query whatever I want to do. So now I can say insert into the users table, right? So the user has username, email, and password, and the values are going to be $1, $2, $3. So the reason we are using dollars is that it prevents, it's basically a security mechanism to not insert any, you could say, doubtful parameters, or there's no chance for anyone to give any kind of hack into the DB. So to give this arguments, the next argument for this is going to be an array of all the arguments of all the $1 here, basically. So we are going to be giving the first one is username, the second one is email, and the third one is the hash and not the password. The resultant is going to be error and rows, or let's say response. Let's save that. And so if, let's again the same thing. So if error, or else we have inserted it, and now we can, so let's see what the create user response is. So it's an ID, right? So we have to return an ID. You can just say return callback of null, because the error is null now, and the response, let's define response here. It's basically an ID which is res.rows of 0.id. So the response.rows, response usually, and this, so the response has a rows field which is an array, and the first one will usually have the response, and it's an object and has an ID parameter or field, and we'll test this after creating the service. So let's just create the functions. So this is the first one. So the second one would be the get user. Exports.get user is equals to function get user of call dot comma cv. So to get the user, we have this ID. So this is call dot request, and we just query using client. So we'll be saying select username, email from users, where id is equals to $1, and the first and the only element in that array would be the id, and error and result. So again, if error, we just return callback. Else we have this we'll create this response object which has username, which is rest.rows of 0.username, and email which is rest.rows of 0.email, and we'll return this in the callback, which is cb of null comma response. So I think that's it for the second function, which is getUser. And there's this create token function, which is next. We say, okay, let me, create token, which is a function create token, similar to that previous functions. So we create a token. What we get is the user. User is equals to call.request.user. The first query would be query the DB for user with given email, because we don't have the ID, and check if passwords match, and then create token with username and email, and also ID, username and email. So that's what we're going to do. Line.query. So I want to select ID, username, we have the email from users, where email is equals to $1 and email, and we get error and result. Actually user.email. So we handle the error. Else, if the user exists, then what we're going to do is we are going to compare the password. bcrypt.compare. We're going to compare user.password with rest.rows of 0.password, and we're going to get error on OK. If not OK, or if this error, I guess, if there's error, then we'll return cb of error comma null. If it's OK, we're going to go in. So if it's OK, we're going to actually modify the user object here. So let's and we're going to be saying user.id is equals to rest.rows of 0.id. So just pushing the ID from the DB, whatever you got from the DB, into the user object, because we're going to write this with the token. And user.username is equals to rest.rows of 0.username. And now we sign the token. Sign. So the first one will be the payload, which is the user, and the second argument is some secret key to sign this. So we're going to be using secret. This actually should be something much complicated, but yeah, for our case we're going to be using that. We'll be getting the error and token. So we'll also handle the case here, and else we got the token. Now we have to return the response, which is token, and now I say return cb, error is null, and the response. So we also want to handle if not OK. So return cb of new error, let's say incorrect password, because we got the passwords don't match. Yeah, this should work. We'll be testing this after a while, after finishing all the 4. I think it's almost done. We have this is authenticator remaining, so let's write that let's write that too. Is authenticator is equals to function we'll take the call and callback. We get the token from this request. So with this token we need to verify, basically using the jwt.verify. So let's say jwt.verify the token and the secret which we used to sign. So we can see here that we used to sign, the secret we used is secret, so we have to give the same secret here, and the callback will be having error and user. So let's handle error. So else we'll have the response, which is we're going to have the user and OK as true, right? So the OK is going to be true here, and the user is going to be of, let's say, I think user will be user itself, and we can just say cb of null comma response. It's actually response. Yeah, and we also want to send OK false here if we have an error. Okay, so I think we have these 4 functions created here. So we need to tell the service or the server that we have the functions here. So let's import the functions first, or the methods, which is create user, create token. I think it should be. So make sure you do this whatever function method you are writing, similar to this, whatever definition you are giving, make sure you do it in camel case. Not here in this case, I'm just saying here. So this should be like this: create user, whatever function here you want to give. So let's say is authenticated, and the other, what's the other function? Get user. Yeah, it's get user. We'll require it from ./user. And now inside this service we can just say my create token or the create user is create user, create token. Actually you can just select this. Is authenticated be the same, and get user. So these are the 4 functions I want to use, and I have defined them. So that's what you're seeing. Start the service. It is running. So now we have this user service running. What we want to do is we want to create a new folder called gateway. So cd into gateway. So this is going to be the gateway which we were seeing here, this one. So this is going to be an Express API. So I'm going to say npm init -y, and I'm going to install Express, and I want to say I want to open this as index.js and save this, and let's do the boilerplate for Express. So we are doing this firstly because we need gateway to interact with the gateway for the clients to interact with the microservices, and also to test the microservice. I think we need the gateway. Usually there are some other methods to test this as well. We can write the client, and we can run the client which calls the functions in this methods in this service. So we'll also, but I think it's more useful if we write the gateway in our case, because we can finish the gateway as well as test the microservices. So I'll just say Express, and the port is going to be 5001, and app.listen at this port, and there will be a callback, and I want to say server at this port. I want to use, let's say, app.use/user, then I want to say use the user router. Let's create the user router. Let's say user.js. So what I'm doing is, for each service I'm going to create a router. So let's say Express, require Express, and router would be express.router, and module dot exports will be router. And now we can say router dot, let's say post slash, right? So I think you might have noticed that if you're going to create a user, or if you're going to do any authenticated tasks, so we need to have a middleware, right? So I want to create a file for that, auth.js, which will have one function, and we'll be using that function as a middleware. And the thing is, this function will be using or communicating with the user microservice in order to, basically it will be calling the isAuthenticated function. Okay, I think if I start writing, you might get a hold of it. For this, we are going to actually copy a bit from our index.js actually. So let's copy 3 of this and paste it here. So we need this, and also we need to copy whatever is in the user service protos and user.proto. We need it in this gateway. So gateway slash protos. Let's create the gateway protos folder and then copy this, and now this should work. So what I did actually was we need the protos, the user.proto file in our gateway folder. So that's what I was doing. So we have a proto file in our gateway as well as in the user service. So this might actually create problems where if you are like handling in pretty big or higher number of microservices, then there might be a problem like the microservice might update the proto file, but whatever the gateway is or the API is handling, it might not have the updated proto file. So there are many ways, a few ways to do this. One of it is to have a vendor kind of thing. So whenever running the gateway, or you can frequently check for any changes in this repositories, in the microservices repositories protofiles, and if there are any changes, then it will just download those changes and put it in the gateway protos folder. So we could do that, but I don't think that might make much of sense in this whatever video I'm making, because these are just basic 3 microservices. It might be useful when you are handling with a team of multiple members and multiple number of microservices. So I think that's when it might be useful. But I'll be putting the link to the vendor which I was talking about. You can just try that if you want to see that. And here I also need the package definition. So I have the package definition, and I will create the user service. I think it's the same. So we can just load this, and it will say this as user service, and this will be dot user service, and the client which will be using to interact with the user microservice is the new user service itself, and this is the address at which the user service is running, which is 50,050, and we have to also send gRPC dot credentials dot insecure. I think we haven't installed let's go into Reddit /gateway. I think we have to install this. We need protoloader and gRPC.js. gRPC.js. I want this file auth.js to export a function which is let's say is authenticated, or we can say requires auth. It makes more sense. It's a function requires auth. It's a middleware, so it will take request, response, and next. So we are going to get the token in the form of request dot headers of authorization, and just going to split in the middle and take the first one. So basically why we are doing this is that the token will be getting in this form like this. So we want to split this at the space, and when we do that we get this as an array, right? And we want to take the first element, not the 0th element. Let me put this, and we're going to use this token. And what we're going to do is, now we're going to use this client to call the isAuthenticated function, and as a request we need to send the token, right? Because if you see the user.proto, the isAuthenticated request is taking token as an input. So that's the first argument, and the second is a callback with error and message. So if there is an error, I'm going to say console.error of error and return res.status of 500.json. So each response we are going to send is going to have a success field and also a message field. Let's say some user auth error, let's say. Else, if there are no errors, I want to create a user object which I want to attach with this request. So the ID is message.id, username is message.username, email is message.email, and I want to say request.user is equals to user, right? And after this I want to call the next function. So what this does is it moves on to the next handler. So we'll be using that here. Let's say requires auth equals to require auth. We'll just import that, and before even hitting any of the roots, I'll say app.use requires auth along with app.use express.json to handle body parser. I mean, it's kind of body parser, but this comes with express itself. So let's say as register. So with this we'll be getting username, email and password from the request.body, and we can actually check if there's no username or if there's no email or if there's no password. What I want to do is I want to say rest.status. I think status code is 401 and JSON with success as false and message as missing fields to register user. Else. So I think we don't need of else, but we can. Okay. Else. We can directly call the create user function of using the client, and it takes the body. Let's say request. Let's say create user request is an object which has user and it has email, username and password. So we are putting the user here because in the user microservice, in the user service, we have this create user request and the first field is user, and inside this we have this username, email, password. We don't need to send the ID, but we can send whatever fields are present in it, and we can create the user by saying create user request, and comes back as a callback, and the arguments are error and message. So if let's take this, and if there is error, We can just paste this. So if there's no error, then we need to say that the user is created. So let's copy that and we can say success as true, user created, and let's give an ID back as well, which is message.id. I think we will get the ID, create user response, right? We will get the ID. Go into Reddit/gateway. Let's try running this. I think we have installed it, right? I think it's create insecure. So let's create insecure, not just insecure. We have to change that here also. Okay, yeah, we have to import the user router, which is /user. Okay, the server is running, and let's run the user service. Let's say nodemon. Okay, and also we have to be sure whenever we are creating a client, we have to be sure that whatever address we are giving, it has to match, at least the port has to match this the service which we are going to communicate. Okay, so we are hitting the right client. So I think we can test this. To create this user, we don't need to register, right? We need to first. So I think this might not make sense. We can put that here. We can import requires auth is equals to require./auth, and before any handler, we can just put it requires auth here. But in this case, we don't need this, so we can just remove it. And I think we can try to hit this. Let's say register. I think we can hit this. Let's say register, and we need to give the username. Let's say mono, and the email mono@mail, let's say gmail.com, and the password, let's say mono1234. So let's send this. Okay, I think it's /user/register. So it says user created and ID is 0, right? So I think, yeah, it is hitting and it's creating the user. We can check that by calling the getUser function. So let's say we want to log in. So let's say router.post/login. This also doesn't need the requires auth middleware. We will only be needing email and password. Request.body, and we can say client.create token, and let's say, so if we look at this proto for create token request, we have a user, right? So let's say create token request. So we have a user with email and password. So I want to send this directly, create token request, and we get back the error message. So if error, we'll handle that. We'll say create token error. So if there's no error, then we can just say return this dot status of 200.json and success will be true, and the token will be message.token. So we can test that now. So let's say login with the same body. Okay, we are getting the token with the login root, because it is hitting the create token function and it returns the token. So now that it's working, let's see, let's actually check the DB. So let's say PC equal Postgres. Let's change the DB to Reddit Backend Reddit, I guess. And let's say select char from users. You can see that there is we are filling the table, right? So and also the reason we're using for varchar of 164 is that this password is hashed and it needs much larger string than usual limit, which is 32 or 64. This could be 64 and it depends on the hash function the library is using, but I think it's good to have a higher number. So that's the reason. So we have the login and register root. Let's get the user by ID, right? So also let's say root.get/id. And id is equals to request dot. This is params. So we can say client dot get user and let's just say id. We'll get back the error message. So we'll say get user error. If there's no message.email, then we'll say return rest.status of 404. JSON success is false. Actually it's true, right? Because there's no errors. There are no errors. So, and the message will be user not found. Else copy this 200 and instead of this message we can just see we can just give as message.user. So let's try this. user/0. So I was getting an error where in the user service and in the create user function, the response we were returning, we were setting the ID from rest.rows of 0, but we are not checking if the rows was empty. So we could, and also even if it was successfully inserted, it was not giving any ID as response. So what you could do is you can just say returning ID you can put returning ID at the end of the query to make sure that the DB returns ID with the response and with the rows. So we can just return the ID. So that's what the problem was. Let's restart this. So right now and also in the get user function, we need to put this username and email inside the rest user field. So that's one problem we had found. So yeah, now I'm getting this get user field. So I think the ID is wrong, but let me just fix that too. Okay, we have the ID, right? So I'll just say ID as ID. Yeah, I think that works. So we get the username, email, we won't get the password, it's empty, and we get the ID as the user ID. So that's that. So I think that's the functionality we were seeing for the user service, right? So now whatever is remaining is the post service and the subreddit. So let's get started with the post service. So I think I'll create a new tab into Reddit, and I'll say post service, and I'll actually copy the user service package.json into, okay, let me go into the post service first and do npm init, and then copy the user service package.json here and then do npm install. So post service is actually very similar to it's very similar to the user service, whatever I said, the gRPC and the index.js, it's quite similar. So let's start with the gRPC.js, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, copy everything here. Okay, I think even before creating the gRPC file, we need to /post, and we need to create the protos file, right? So let's say protos dot /post dot proto. So again, the syntax is proto3, and let's, like how we define the user in the user service, let's define the post in post service, how the post is going to look like. So the post is going to have a title, which is 1, and it's going to have a description, and this post will belong to a subreddit. So there will be a subreddit ID, which is 3, and this will have an author or creator, which is 4, and this will finally have an ID, which is 5. This is how the post is going to look like. So let's say post service, this is a set of RPCs. So it's actually service. So we are going to have a set of functions similar to the user service. So the first one is create post, obviously, because it is a core functionality of post service. So we'll have create post request, which will return create post response, and we'll have get post, which will have get post, which will take get post request and returns get post response. So I'm going to say update post, update post response, and we're going to have like post request, which returns like post response, and comment post request and comment post response. And so okay, so the first message is create post request. To create a post, basically we need whatever the post is, and create post response would be an ID which is of type int, and that's for create post. And for get post, it's actually the reverse, because we'll get the ID from the client, and for get post response, we'll get the post as the response. And update post request, so we need 3 things when we are updating a post. The first one is the ID of the post, let's say the post ID, or let's say the ID itself, and we need the user ID to see if the post belongs to the user. So this is basically coming from the gateway by saying request.user.id, so that it's so that it sends the current user. And what is the post needs to be updated. So this ID of the post should be updated to this version. So that's what you're doing. So there's like post request post. Do we want to like? So that's an ID. And we can also actually take the user ID who's liking to see if we don't like the user. We don't like it multiple times. So we are not going to have the unlike functionality here, dislike or not, the unlike kind of thing. So you can only like it, we can't take it back. So the like post response is basically the ID of the post. And we have the comment post request. We have the ID of the post. We need the ID of the user. And we need the comment, which is a string. So the user ID is basically to check if he has access. And comment post response will just send the ID. I think that's for the definition. So let's go to gRPC.js and paste whatever we copied, and this will be running in port 50,051. And let's go and create the index.js file. For gRPC.js in post service, I didn't do anything. Like, I just copied whatever was there from the user service and changed the port to 50,051. And in index.js, I think we can also copy a bit of boilerplate from there. Actually, let's copy until this. And instead of create user and create token, we haven't created it yet. We'll just count it out. So the proto is post proto, and the proto file is post.proto. So we have to add service, and it's post proto dot post service dot service, and an object of functionalities. So we haven't created the function, so we'll be filling this at last. So I'll create post.js, which contains all the functions. So it's similar to the user.js. So let's copy the PSQL functionalities and just paste it here. So the first one is slash. Okay. So the first function is create post, which is a function create post, which has call and CB, similar to what I was saying. So to create a post, we are going to take the title, description, what else? The author and the subreddit ID from call.request.post. And similar to the reasoning is, we have the post field inside which we have the title, description and all. So while even grabbing it, we just say .post instead of just call.request. So we can now query. We can just say insert into post table with title, description, subreddit ID and author values. I think it's author, right? Let's use backend Reddit, and let's describe. We can do \d and the table name, which is post, which describes, and it's author. And the values for this is going to be again $1, $2, $3 and $4. Yeah, and the 4 values is going to be just whatever we grabbed: description, subreddit ID, author, and we'll get error and result. So I'm just going to copy this error handling, put it here, else. So return CB of null, and okay, the response is an object. So let's see what the create post response is. Just an ID. So we have an ID, and this I think will be rest.rows of 0.id, and we have to not forget to put returning ID here so that it returns ID, and we will just return the response. Yeah, that should do for create post. And next one is exports.getPost, which is a function get post callback, and we get the ID from call.request, and we'll just query directly. It's like client.query select title, description, subreddit ID, author from post where ID is equals to this, or let's say $1, and it's going to be ID, and we get error and res back. We'll just copy the error here. So if all goes well, we have to have a response, which is actually I guess the post. So for get post response, it's the post. So we have a post inside which we have the title, which is rest.rows of 0.title. I'll just copy this. Description is the description, and the subreddit ID, and the author is author. So we'll send the response by saying return callback of null comma response. So this must do for get post. And the third one is, so these two are done. So the third one is update post. So let's say update post is a function, update post, which takes call and callback as parameters again. So for update post, we take the ID on the post and the author ID, I guess. The user ID from call.request. So we're going to do client.query. Actually, let's take the title, description, and both of these from post. So let's query by saying select author from post where ID is equals to $1, which is the ID. We get error and res. So basically we are getting the author of the post which was given, and we'll check if the author's ID is same as the user ID. So now if first we'll handle the error, right, and else if there is no error, and we'll check if res.rows.length is greater than 0, and we'll say res.rows of 0.author is equals to user ID. So we have to check if the user is the one who created the post. So there are 3 conditions here, I guess. So in this, any one might be empty or both of them are not empty. So condition for that is if title is not equals to empty string and description is not equals to empty string. So finally we want to just run a query, right? So we can just say let query, and we can just update the query according to whatever parameters we are getting. So I think this might make sense after a few lines of code. So if both of them are not empty, I'll just say update post set title is equals to $1, description is equals to $2, where id is equals to $3, right? And we can also have values. So this will be, and the values will become an array of title, description, and id. So else if title is not equals to empty and the description is empty, if the description is empty, we don't want to update the description, right? So we'll just say, I'll just copy this. I'll say set title is equals to this, and where id is $2, and I'll just remove the description. Else if description is not equals to empty, so it's the reverse. So I'll just set description here as well. This query and values, I'll just say client.query, give the query and the values, and error and response will be coming back as callback. Again, let's handle error. So the reason now is that we are using the query and values here. I think we can just return callback null and id. So if the user is not the author and is trying to edit, so basically that shouldn't happen, we'll just return callback with new error not authorized or user not authorized, and the data to be null. So yeah, that must be for update post. So the next one is like post, right? So let's write this here. Exports.like post is equals to function like post call cb. For like post, we'll get the id, user id, and okay. So for like post, we'll get the id and the user id from call.request, and we'll say client.query update posts set likes is equals to likes plus 1, where id is equals to $1. So this query actually doesn't check if the user has already liked. So I think we could have some mechanism to check if the user has already liked it, but I think we can just go for this now. So this is id, and error and this comes back. So what I'm thinking is, like, you can have a table similar to the subreddit and user table to map the post and who have liked the post. That could be a separate table, and we can first check that table if the user doesn't exist, and for the post mentioned or with the post id, so we can then go on to update the post and increment the likes here. So I'll just again handle the error. and let's return cb null and id. I think that should be for like post, because we are not doing much, we are just incrementing the likes by 1. Okay, let's do exports dot comment post, which is comment post call comma cb. So we'll get the id, user id, and the comment itself from call dot request. So for this we have to, we'll query the db again. I'll say insert. We're going to just insert into comments table. So if we see the comments table which we have created, it has id, post id, and content. So insert into comments of, we have used post id and content, right? Yeah, post id is the id. So I think post id, content. We need to add user id. I think we haven't added in the comment table. Comment table. So we have to add, so that we need to know who has commented that, right? So let's say alter table comments, add column user, which is an integer which references users of id. Okay, this is actually a reserved keyword, I guess. So let's say user id. Okay, so the user id, post content, and values will be $1, $2, and $3. And this is user id, post id is id, and comment. Error and address, we'll get it back. Just handle the error, and else we'll just ask it to return id. Let's say returning id, and I can just say return callback of null, and the response would be id, which is just dot rows of 0.id. Yeah, I think that should be it. Now we have to import it here. From /post we are importing create post, get post, update post, like post, and comment post. So we have to add it to this service, like we have implemented it. So we'll add that here: create post, get post, update post, like post, and comment post. So this is what we're doing. And so I think that's pretty much it for the post service. I think we have to add it to the gateway. Actually, let's copy the proto. Let's copy the protos from post service. This is the user service. Okay, so we can use have.use /post and say post router and import it here. We haven't created it, we'll just create it now. Post.js, and it's again some boilerplate, require express, and router will be express.router, module.exports is equals to router. And let's start with router.post / and to create a post we actually need user authentication, right? So let's say const requires auth equals to require ./auth, and after this we'll say requires auth, and then we'll go on to proceed with the callback. So whatever we did for user service, like connecting to the service, we have to do this here too. So we'll just copy this bit and paste it here. So again, this will be post.proto, and this port we are running is 5051, and this is the post service. Yeah, and it's new post service. So let's take title, description, and subreddit ID from request.body, and we can just check. I think we can just take it from here. We'll just validate this. So if not title, or if not description, or if not subreddit ID, actually we can ignore this validation for a while because we haven't created the subreddit service, but still we can test it without the validation. And I can just recline dot create post. Before that, I'll just create the request object, so which is create post request. So this will have a post object which has the title, the description, the subreddit, and the author. I think it's the author, not sure. Let's do dash d dash post. It's author, which is request.user.id. So yeah, I think it's ID. We can now give the request, and we get the error and message. And if error, I think we can just copy this. So else, actually this is create post error. So we can do rest.json, actually status 200.json, success is true, and the message is post created, and again we can send the ID, which is message.id. So actually let's test this. Okay, let's say nodemon. Update post response, we don't have. Okay, we haven't defined the update post response, which is the int32 ID itself. Yeah, that works. I think we should make the same change in the post service as well. And then start the service. We also have to start the user service because you're going to use middlewares, right? So we'll say nodemon here as well. So post service running at 50,051, user service running at 50,050, and gateway is running at 5,001. So let's do /post/ and do a post request, and let's do title is post 1, description is post disk 1, subreddit ID, let's say 1. So we have the user authorer, which means we don't have the token, basically. That's what it means. So to do that, I think we can just do, okay, how do I create a, yeah. So I can do login with actually, yeah, I think I can just do login here, /user/login, and I will get a token. I'll copy that, and inside header I'll have this authorization header which has bearer and the token, and I'll paste this new token here, and I'll say post /post. We have an error. Okay, subreddit ID. Okay, subreddit ID does not exist. Yeah, so subreddit doesn't exist, right? So actually let's build the service very quickly. So let's go to Reddit, and let's actually copy this post service into subreddit service, and let's go into subreddit service, and now let's just change this. So subreddit will be running in 50,052, and instead of create post we'll have subreddit get subreddit. Let's do the two of them for now. Subreddit proto, and this proto is also subreddit proto. So let's copy both of them, paste it here, remove this. So again it's subreddit proto dot subreddit service. Okay, so this is from dot subreddit. So let's actually say move post.js to subreddit.js. If we refresh this, yeah. So we have create subreddit, and we can have get subreddit, and I'll just remove all of this. So we can just say insert into subreddit. So if we see the definition, let me see, subreddits, we have ID, name and description, that's it, right? It's subreddits. So we have ID, name and description, because ID is automatically created. Oops, yeah. So name and description, and here also it's just name and description, and it's dot subreddit. And get subreddit, it's name, yeah. So we can just remove every others. It's from subreddits. I'm giving the ID and the name and subreddit, description, and the ID is ID, no author. So actually let's define the proto as well. So let's move the proto protos dot slash post dot proto to protos slash subreddit dot proto. So if you go into this, you can just rename everything. So we have the name and description, and we have the author also, who created the subreddit, right? This is 3, this is 4, and actually let's remove everything except create and get. So it's create subreddit, I'm just changing. Okay, let's try to change everything from post to subreddit. Yeah, I think that might have worked. I have no idea. Yeah, it actually changed everything. So let's change this too. Yeah, I think this will be fine. Let's go into the subreddit Dot Js. And yeah, I think this should be. Let's actually test this to be sure. Uppercase R. Okay, it's running in 5052. And now let's go to a gateway, which is in here. So let's kill this. Let's go and let's create Subreddit Dot Js. Let's say I want everything from this to this. So module.exports is equals to router. So I'm just copy pasting it because it's exactly the same, just few differences, but mostly the same. We need to copy. Let's go to Reddit and let's copy the proto file from subreddit/proto/subreddit.proto into the gateway protos folder. Yeah. So this is the subreddit service. So I think okay. I think we have already defined it in this gRPC, in this index. So I think we can just copy this and put it here. Let's just do subreddit service. So again, subreddit service, new subreddit service, and which pings the 50,052 port. Now let's do router.post/ we need requires auth and request response. So what we'll be getting is we'll be getting the name and the description of the subreddit. So it's request.body, and we'll just say client.create subreddit. Is it create subreddit, right? And for this we need the body, which is a subreddit itself. So we can say create subreddit request, and inside this we need to have a subreddit object. Inside this we need the name and the description. So I'll say create subreddit request, and error and message comes back. So if error else. So if there is error, I'll just do this. Create subreddit error, and else we can just return this response with an ID. Success will be true and subreddit has been created, and its ID is message.id. So this makes sense. Let's try. I'll explain what I did in a bit if you haven't got it. So we'll say into gateway and node more. So actually have to call subreddit router. We have to import this subreddit, and we have to use this inside the app. So slash subreddit would be subreddit router. Right, so let's go to subreddit, and also make sure that you have the token, because this requires auth. So this needs the token in order to create a subreddit. So let's say subreddit 1, and the description is this is first subreddit. Let's subreddit, please create subreddit, and this is get subreddit. And this is a problem when you copy and paste code, you don't know what are the changes you have missed. It's still not a function. So we need create sub, and R must be uppercase. Similarly, sub R must be uppercase. From the gateway, you have to call this like create sub R must be uppercase in Reddit. Let's try this. Yeah, we do have the subreddit now. Now let's try to create the post. Let me see what's the problem with posts. Okay, we don't have a subreddit ID. Actually, we need the subreddit ID. I think we forgot the subreddit ID. Let's add that. Add alter table, post, add column, subreddit ID, which is an integer, and it references subreddits of ID. So I think it should be good now. Let's restart this. Also, another problem that I found that I missed is that instead of message.user.id in requires auth function, we have to give message.id. We have to give message.user.id, because we are getting it using an we are getting it by in the form of a user object, right? So we need to acknowledge the user as well when we are getting the getting the user fields. So let's restart, and just a small correction, and let's try now. Okay, now we created the post. Let's get the post with the ID. I have to get it. I'm using the get by ID. Okay, we have the create post. Let's do the get post. So let's say router.get/id, and this doesn't require any authentication. So we also do request.params and get the ID from it. And now we just do client.get post and give the ID, and we see for error and message. And we handle that here. Else, if there's no error, then we'll just return $200, success is true, and the post will be message.post. Yes. Let's actually see if this works. I'm not sure. Okay, I think post. So the thing is, we have the subreddit ID description coming out. The author is also good, but the title and ID, we are getting it. I mean, the ID shouldn't be 0. In protobufs, the integer field usually is by default 0, and the ID here is not 0, so it's empty, so it's giving it as 0, and the title is empty, and the ID will be ID. So that's that. The ID is coming back, and the title, I think, okay, so it's because when we're creating the post, this must be the title of the post. So now we can just post this. Let's say post 2, post description 2, and now when we get this post with the ID 2, we should get, yeah, we are getting the title and all. So yeah, the get post works, and let's try the edit post. So it's basically router dot put method and slash ID of that post. Request and response comes back, and I get that ID in a similar way. Const ID is equals to params, and we need to update this ID. So I'll just say client dot update post, giving this ID, and not just ID, we need the post coming with us, right? So I'll say update post request will be ID post, and author or user ID, I guess user ID is request.user.id, and that needs, so hence we need the requires auth middleware, because we are using this, we are sending the user's ID. So we can just say update post request, and we'll get the error message. So it's the same. So we'll say update post error. Yeah. So I think we can just, so we have to see what's the proto for update post response. It's just an ID, so we'll just send the ID, or we can just say message.id. Okay, so let's do this. Let's put this, and I want to say updated post 2 and updated description as well. Let's send this. Post will be an object with title and description. So let's try this. Okay, so it returns the ID, which is 2, and now let's get this, and yeah, it has updated the title and description, and yeah, it works. So let's test the other functionalities, which is like post. So let's build the API for this. So router.get slash like slash the ID of the post, and requires auth, yes, and we say the same thing. We'll get the ID from the params, and we'll just call client.like post, and ID user ID would be request.user.id. Even though we are not using this right now, I think it's better to send it. So error and res, and we'll check for error. This is like post error, and yeah, we'll just return the same. So let's do that. Post slash like slash 2. Okay, this is message. Yeah, let's test this. Okay, we have liked this. I think we when we are getting the post, let's go to proto. We are saying get post. I think we can return the number of likes as well, right? So let's go to get posts. Get post, we have to return the likes as well. So author comma likes, and the likes would be restored rows of 0 dot likes. And yeah, so now we can get this post number 2. So the post, okay, the post must have the number of likes, right? So let's say 6, and let's try now. Also refresh the server. Okay, I think we have to add this to the gateway proto as well, the post proto in the gateway. Let's restart the server, and we now are getting the number of likes also. So let's try once again. Let's like, and then you can see the likes has been incremented, right? So that's working as well. Let's move to the next one, which is the comment functionality. So we okay, so let's do roto.post slash comment slash on this post. It requires auth, and request address comes back, and I take ID from the params, and I take comment from request.body, and I call client.comment post, and I say comment post request error, and result comes back. So I just copy this and handle error. This is comment post error, and yeah, so we need to build the comment post request. So let's see what the comment post request looks like. So we have the ID, the user ID, and the comment, right? So we have the ID, the comment, and the user ID, which is request.user.id. And yeah, that should do. Let's try to run this. So this slash comment slash ID, right? Post dash comment slash ID, and I'm going to send. You can actually keep this and just add a field comment. This is first comment, and let's remove this. We get post. Okay, again this is a message, not res. Let's try now. Okay, we have added the post comment, but we don't have any API to get all the posts, get all the comments in a post. What we can do is we can, when getting a post, we can also have a list of comments in that post, right? So we assume that we can't reply to a comment, so we just grab all the comments from a post for now. So what it looks like is this post will have comments, and it'll have some array of strings, right? So to do that, we need to do a query even before. So let's say here we need to do a query. Let's say client.query select. Let's once look into the DB ones. The \d comments. Here the post ID, content, and user ID. So we need to pick up the content from comments where post id is equals to $1 and the value of post id is id, right? So we get error 2 and rest 2. So if this is error 2, then we return the error 2, else we do this, whatever we were doing. And instead of this, we just comments, we just put it rest2 dot rows of 0 dot content. I'm actually not sure. Let's actually console.log this rest2 dot rows, right? Let's now get this post in order to see what the values are. Okay, so we have, this is the first comment, and so it's an array of objects, right? Okay, so let's say const comments is equals to rest2 dot rows dot filter, not filter, dot map comment. I can just say return comment dot content. Yeah, that does the job. So what it does is it maps through the array, and then it just picks up the it just converts the object of this string into an array of strings. Basically, we don't have objects to deal with, right? So we now do comments as comments, which is this object, this array which we have built just now. But this doesn't work as of now, even if you do this, because the post.proto doesn't take the comments. So what we have to do is we have to do repeated string comments is equals to 2. So this is like an array of strings, and we have to make the same change to the post.proto file in gateway. So this will be in get post response, which is repeated string comments is equals to 2. Let's see if this works. Not exactly sure. So let's run this. It actually doesn't work. In the response of the proto, we are giving post as a separate field and comments as a separate field, but in this we are putting comments inside post, so we have to remove that out. And also in this gateway we have to separate it out, like we don't need it dot post. And yeah, this does the job. So I'm getting it 2 times because I think I may have posted the request 2 times, multiple times. So that might be the reason. And yeah, I think that's it for this video. I don't know, but I think there is still much more to do with this, but I think the video is getting too long. The functionalities that I might add might be regarding to the subreddit that I was talking, to get the users in the subreddit, and we can also improve the like functionality where we can where the user can only like once instead of multiple times. And also the errors can be handled in a much more gracious way, and much more validations can be done. I think there are much more things to do with this project, but I think this might give you a basic idea of how to build microservices with Node.js, and I think you can take it from here. That's what I can say. How to whatever errors you are getting, how to handle errors. I think it's pretty much very easy from this point of stage where we are. And so yeah, I'll leave that to you. I will upload this to my GitHub repo, and you can clone it from there, fork it from there. Make sure you star the repository, and also make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.